Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast hosted by Eric Rostad. Join him on his 15-year journey through the immortal books. He'll share what he's learning, explore profound ideas across time and cultures, and share the one thing he always hopes to remember from each immortal book.
Today I'm going to cover Cratylus, a dialogue by Plato. Plato is author 18 out of 200 on my immortal books reading list. Well, this one is my favorite dialogue of Plato so far. I've only read 5. I still have a long way to go. I do plan to read all of them. But of the 5 that I've read so far, this is my favorite one. And it is so interesting, and it was just a delightful dialogue. So I want to tell you about it in this episode. So what this dialogue is about the origin of language and the correctness of names. So it's basically an exploration of this question. Is there a reason behind the name of something? For instance, like justice or courage or love, or is it just by chance? And then further, if a name is found to be correct, what is the source of that correctness? What this dialogue does, it's a Socratic dialogue. So Socrates is a main part of it, and then he's asking questions, but he's also giving a lot of guesses as to what words mean and that sort of thing. But he's dialoguing, he's conversing with 2 different people, and these 2 people represent kind of the different ways that we can look at the correctness of names. And so first we have Cratylus, and that's what the dialogue is named after. And he's of the view that there are absolute terms for names. And so his view would be that there is a correct name for each thing, and that it's one that belongs to it by nature. A thing's name isn't whatever people agree to call it, but there's a natural correctness of names for the different things. So that's on one side. The other side is Hermogenes, and he looks at it more from a relativistic point of view, in that the correctness of names is determined by convention and agreement. So basically, names are agreed upon by the community on whatever they decide the name to be. There's not something in its nature that gives it that name, which is what Cratylus would think. And so the purpose of this dialogue, Socrates states it towards the end, and so I just want to read it. It's really short here. He says, "It was the ancients who combined things in this way. Our job is to divide where they put together so as to see whether or not the primary and derivative names are given in accord with nature." End quote. And so that's what you see Socrates doing for much of this dialogue. He's looking at different names. He's looking at the name for justice or courage or love. And he's looking at the names that came together to form that word, and is trying to pull different meanings of, this is why the name giver would have given this word, how this name would have come about, and so he gives a number of different examples. What's interesting is that he's kind of guessing, and so I didn't know this till the end, but it's not necessarily the case that these are correct. So as a first time reader, it's hard just to know. Okay, that seems like a really cool explanation for how we got the word hero, but is it correct? And so I'll get into that a little bit more in segment 2 here. But yeah, that what he's trying to do is see if these words, these names that were given, if they fall into accord with nature. And as I just mentioned, like the name giver, there's a continual reference to this namer or the maker of names or the name giver. And it really, as far as I could understand it refers to a person, an ancient person or collection of people who gave names to things. It's not necessarily that a god did it, or Socrates isn't interested if a god gave the names, but he's more interested in this name giver and in why the names would have been given. But there's also this element that the name giver could have been wrong, or that they thought a certain thing about nature at that time, or the reality of nature, and so they named things of that, but maybe views have shifted since then, so they could have been off on their naming. So that kind of adds a little twist to it as well. There's another part, and this is towards the beginning, where Socrates references Homer and specifically references the Iliad, in that Homer would distinguish between what God what the gods called things and what men called things. And he gives the one example of the river, that there was this river that the gods had one name for and humans had another name for. But the idea would be that the name the gods gave it was the correct name. So I read just one version of this dialogue. The first 4 dialogues I read a couple times, so there were different versions. But this one I just read from the Complete Works, edited by John M. Cooper. And this one is translated by C.D.C. Reeve. Now, once I started reading this, and I loved it. I looked for other versions. You can get this in a Loeb, the green books. You can get it in that edition, and it would have a few other dialogues as well. So, especially if you're interested in the Greek side of it, it's got the Greek on the left side and then the English on the right. That would be a good option if you didn't want to buy like the whole Complete Works. And then Hackett publishers, they have a version just of this dialogue, and it's the one that's translated by Reeves. So if you just want this one, you can just buy that book as well. For the rest of this podcast, so I just kind of gave a brief little intro. The next 2 segments, in the next segment, I will cover the 3 things that stuck out to me, and then in the final segment 3, I'll cover the one thing that stuck out the most in this Cratylus dialogue. Well, my favorite thing about this book was just how Socrates would go through specific words, and mostly Hermogenes. He would ask, what's the origin of this word, or what do you think? And at first I thought, okay, this is legit. This is what they actually are, the origins of these words. But then I read some introductions and commentaries, and it said that these were guesses by Socrates, and so the way to think of them is that sometimes they were valid and they actually offer some deep insight, but other times they were guesses. So I'm going to highlight a few here that I thought were just awesome, but I then looked them up to see if it was actually the case on a few of these. So I'll highlight that as well. But the first one that came up is the word heroes. And what Socrates says is the origin of that word. If you take out the H and then you take out the E at the end, you have the word eros, which is erotic love. And so what the word heroes would mean is born out of love. And what he says is that the heroes is in Homer, they were demigods, which means one parent was a god, the other parent was a human. And these would be the heroes. And so they were born out of love, and it was born out of love between a god and a human. So you think of Achilles, and his mom Thetis was a goddess, and then his father was a human. And Achilles is considered to be one of the heroes. And I just loved that thing, and here's the word heroes, and I never even thought that you can kind of see the word eros in that word itself. But that's one of them that turns out to be that it's not the case, that the word probably came earlier than that. But I do love that idea, and just even thinking of the word heroes and how that can be helpful as we're reading some of the Greek myths or the Greek epic poetry, that the word heroes, it refers to somebody who was born out of love, in the sense that that they were probably a demigod, in that they had a god as a parent and then a human as a parent. There was another section that talked about Hades and then shackles. And so first off, Socrates says the word Hades is based off a Greek word that means what they can't see. So it's invisible. And you think of Hades, the afterworld, none of us can see it. And there's this constant thought of, what's Hades like? And we get one view of it in the Odyssey is kind of shades being in there, shades of people being in there. We get different versions of Hades or ideas of Hades in some of the other dialogues by Plato. But there's this aspect of it that it's invisible. And when I looked that up, that does seem to be correct, of the correctness of that name. But then after he says that, Socrates asked, which is stronger, force or desire? So like if you want get someone to do something, what is stronger, force or desire? And I love this question because it came up in the Iliad. I did a reading group on the Iliad a few years ago, and that was one of the questions that we were asked. What's the stronger thing to get somebody to do something you want them to do? Is it to force them to do it, or is it to persuade them? And one of the ways you could persuade is through desire. And so I want to read this part because I think it's just it's so interesting here. And so here's Socrates on Hades. The words Hades knows how to speak are so beautiful. It seems that everyone, even the sirens, have been overcome by his enchantments. And then later on, for hasn't he well understood that when people are free of their bodies, he can bind them with the desire for virtue, but that while they feel the agitation and madness of the body, not even the famous shackles of his father Cronos could keep them with him. End quote. So you've got this idea here. Socrates is asking Hermogenes, like, how once people get into Hades, so they die and their soul goes to Hades, how are they kept in there? Because there's a natural desire for people to escape something if they're shackled. And so that's where that question comes in of what's the stronger shackle, force or desire? And the answer there is desire. You can lock someone into something easier through desire than by force. There'll be a stronger impetus to fight against the force, whereas you're kind of overcome by the desire. And so I just thought that picture of it was so interesting. But they say the reason people stay in Hades is because Hades, the god Hades, knows how to speak so beautifully, and that everyone's just entranced by this. And there's this element of we want to be around people who are virtuous and learn from them and that kind of thing. And so there's this idea that Hades is virtuous, and so the people out of desire stay in Hades, and as opposed to being forced to stay in Hades. I thought that was just such an interesting idea. Again, if you've listened to other episodes, it's just something I kind of track as I'm reading, just the ideas of the afterlife and what people thought of them, whether it's from ancient Mesopotamia or Egypt or Greece. And so I find that to be fascinating. And that whole section was just really neat. The word for joy is an outpouring or good movement of the soul's flow. I'll get into more of the movement things in the next segment, but I thought that was interesting, just a way of thinking of joy, an outpouring or good movement of the soul's flow. And then eros, erotic love again, it flows in from the outside. So there's this element that it kind of flows in from the outside, and that being a picture of erotic love. Again, but I mean, this whole dialogue is just full of these different words, and whether he's guessing and gets the right answer or not, it's just fascinating to think about these words, and it almost, especially the parts about the gods, it just gives a lot of insight, because if you then think about the gods that way, and you know that going into reading some of the other mythology or even some of the tragedy plays, just to know, like, oh, okay, this is an aspect of the god, and it's based. You can determine that based upon their name. I found it to be very helpful, and I almost wish I had read this before some of those tragedies or the Greek epics. So that was the first thing in this segment, is just some specific words that I thought were really interesting as I read. The second thing I want to talk about is the name giver. And there's this part that says the first name givers weren't ordinary people, but lofty thinkers and subtle reasoners. And as I was thinking about the name giver, I kept thinking about the book of Genesis and how Adam was told by God to name the animals. And I want to read that part really quickly. And this is from Genesis 2. Out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called a living creature, that was its name. End quote. I just always kind of consider that, like, this may be weird, but like, Adam just kind of quickly came up with a name for the thing. But I don't know, after reading this part, the first name givers weren't ordinary people, but lofty thinkers and subtle reasoners. I wonder if that was a better description of Adam in the names that he gave the animals, or if it was just more of like, I mean, it's so quick in the Bible there, he just gave the names to the animals. But maybe there's a little more, loftiness to all that. The third thing that stuck out was this Deus ex machina. And so in Greek plays, like you have all this chaos going on in a Greek tragedy, and just impossible choices and situations, and things become so convoluted that at some of them, there's this God that kind of sweeps in at the end, and there would be this machine that would pull the God in to the theater area, and they would call it the Deus ex machina, and it is just kind of this idea that at the end the God will come in and just kind of wipe everything out or fix everything. And so Socrates references that because they're trying to get to the bottom of language here. And there's this temptation to just say, well, that's what God named things. And so we're just going to take that as it is. But Socrates is throughout this dialogue is saying, no, I want to look at the words themselves. I want to see if we can go back to the ancients. I want to see if we can figure out what these words mean. So let me read this. Unless you want to behave like tragic poets who introduce a deus ex machina whenever they're perplexed, for we too could escape our difficulties by saying that the primary names are correct because they were given by the gods. But is that the best account we can give? Or is it this one, that we got them from foreigners who are more ancient than we are? Or this, that just as it is impossible to investigate foreign names, so it is impossible to investigate the primary ones because they are too ancient. Aren't all these merely the clever excuses of people who have no account to offer or of how primary names are correctly given? And I'll stop reading there. But I thought it was funny that he referenced that in from Greek tragedies, but then that he talked about it as well of that temptation of just saying, well, let's forget about this whole dialogue and just say that the names came from the gods. But no, he really wanted to get to the bottom of this, and we have this dialogue as a result of it. So those were the three things that stuck out. In the next segment here, I'll get into the one thing that really stuck out the most in this dialogue. Well, a big theme for me this year is thinking about the books that I've read in terms of a way that I can tie them all together. And I call it a single thread. And my single thread is direction, in just that small daily decisions that we make determine the direction of our life. That may seem like a very obvious statement, but I just see it come up over and over in literature, and it's very helpful. And I see it in novels, I see it in biographies, nonfiction works, all sorts of places. But with direction, you've got a sense of movement. You're either going in one direction or another, and that is determined by these daily decisions that you're making. And so in this work, what Socrates points out in a lot of the words is this element of movement in the words. And so I'll highlight a few of those words, but that's my one thing for this book is that idea of movement. And again, I'm just always interested in seeing how things relate to direction in life and that sort of thing. And so I loved seeing that aspect of movement. And it's not really something I've thought about before in terms of words or the source of words or the correctness of names, in just this element of movement being in the idea of the names of words that we have in concepts. So let me go through a few of these. The Greek word for gods is something that's always moving or running. The idea of wisdom is that it's understanding of motion and flow. Knowledge is a worthwhile soul, neither falls behind nor runs ahead of the movement of things. Courage, this is one of my favorite ones. Courage is opposing the flow that is contrary to justice. But you can't be opposing everything, or it's just anarchy. So it's opposing the right things. And so you think of courage in battle, and you're opposing the flow. So the flow, I was thinking about this in a couple ways. One is the enemy's coming at you. So the natural thing for somebody to do would be to run in the same direction they're running. So you'd be running away from them to get away from that. But it's also like you're running towards danger. You're running towards in the opposite flow of the enemy coming towards you. And that's courage, because you have to oppose the flow of what is happening there. I think back to this book I read many years ago by the journalist Nicholas Kristof, and he was in China during the Tiananmen Square in 1989, and he makes this comment, and I'm going to paraphrase here, so I'm not getting the exact quote, but it's something along the lines of journalism is one of the few occupations where you run towards what everyone is running away from. And I mean, you think of police officers, you think of soldiers, they're doing the same thing, but there is a very strong level of or idea of courage there. And so you're going against what everybody is afraid of, and you're being courageous to go to oppose that flow. So I loved that idea of opposing the flow. There are a few statements here. It seems to me that the giver of names reviles everything that hinders or restrains the flowing of the things that are. Another statement, what is advantageous is nothing other than the movement of a soul in accordance with the movement of things. The word thinking is the motion of the soul towards everything. And there are plenty of others, and so those are just a few. But just this idea of movement being so strongly tied to so many of these words. What the dialogue closes with is that there are forms that exist. So in terms of the words, there is a form of the idea or the word that exists, but our words are inadequate to the task. But there's still some delightful things to gather from this dialogue. I do get the sense that I need like a deeper study or a version that kind of goes into, hey, here's what Socrates says is the definition of this word or the origin of this word, and he's correct here or he's wrong here, and this is the actual thing. And maybe there is a version of the book out there like that, but that would be helpful. So that's my only thing that was hard with this book, is just to know which of these were correct, which are the actual origins of the word, and which are just the ones that Socrates guessed on. I want to share a quick story that happened while I was reading this work. My main work is online consulting, and so I was talking with a client who is working right now on a project to highlight genocide in different areas of the world. And so I had a call with this client, and she went through the entire story of how the name genocide came about. And the origins of it are from the Armenian genocide, and someone who survived that. But then it gained an importance after the Holocaust. But just how, without the name genocide, without there being something that you can call something like what happened in the last century, without a name or something to call it, it's harder to get people to do things against it. It's harder for there to be action against it. And so just the importance of naming, in this case, naming that genocide has been really important for history. And so that conversation mixed with the correctness of names, and I'm reading this Plato dialogue in the midst of having this discussion with my client. It was just such a neat thing, even with a newer word like that, how important names are in being able to name things. I just even think of like debates that are happening right now online. You can just go to any social media platform and you can see a debate, whether it's on a news channel, people debating each other, or at college campuses or podcast episodes. There's just a ton of debates. And what you rarely see, I only see it every now and then, is people actually defining what the words and what the terms that they are using mean. I mean, how amazing would it be that if a term was referenced, that each side had to give a one-sentence definition for what they think that term means? Because you're watching these debates and you think, these people, they don't even have the same they're not working from the same definition of that name. What if they just took a second to define what they mean? I think that would actually help the discussion, because otherwise you're just talking at each other and you're not really talking about the same thing, because you're thinking of the thing in a different way. So in that sense, I really liked this dialogue and just kind of thinking, what did this word originally mean? Has it changed even for us? Like the word courage or justice, has it changed from what Socrates is presenting here as a guess as to what constituted that name at the beginning? It was just a really fun dialogue to go through in thinking of it in that term. So in conclusion, this is my favorite dialogue so far. If you have not read it, I would recommend getting it. And again, you can get it in that complete works, or you can get it either in the Loeb or a Hackett version where it's just that dialogue. I loved there were just a ton of references to the Iliad in this one, and I loved that. The Iliad's my favorite work of all time, and so I loved that interaction with the Iliad. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. I am in the midst of what I'm calling the Plato Project right now, and I am trying to read through the complete works of Plato. I'm less than a tenth of the way in, so I still have a ways to go, but I do think it'll kind of pick up from this point on. I'm also leading a reading group next week on Man's Search for Meaning. So if you would like to join that, you can do so by becoming a paid subscriber here on Substack for Books of Titans, and you'll get the information on the call it'll be a Zoom call, and it'll be taking place next Wednesday, which is October 13th. So I'd love for you to join. It's going to be an incredible discussion. That's one of my favorite books of all time. So I'd love for you to join in. You can email me at eric@booksoftitans.com if you have any comments about this episode or something you'd like to share. If it's something that would benefit the community, please share that on Substack, where you just do a comment. That the comments are open to all. And I'd love to hear maybe something that you got out of this dialogue that I missed, or a correction or anything. I'd love to hear that. You can follow Books of Titans on Instagram or Twitter. That's at Books of Titans. I'll be back next week, probably discussing another dialogue here by Plato. Until then, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.